So I've broken up the talk, or my section of the talk, into kind of what makes a good figure, what doesn't make a good figure, what you can't do, how to kind of think about planning out a figure and composing it, then a little bit on video, some other important considerations, and then Dave's going to do a bit more of a deep dive into Illustrator, because that is the program. So your publication, your report, your talk that you give, it's a story of your research, and having really nice figures helps tell that story really well, and it helps the reader understand it, and importantly, helps the reviewer understand it. So what makes a good figure? Well, I wanted to start with by saying, what is a figure? Figures typically are going to be made up of things like schematics, actual data, graphs, and importantly, the figure legend. A good figure should be clear and concise. It should be an accurate and truthful representation of the data. What I mean by that is you should be able to take any of the microscope images you had for that control group or whatever, and it should be represented. Don't pick that single one cell that was the only one that was expressing or doing something, that you're trying to tell a story about. Make sure you use your plots correctly and again, be consistent. And as we'll see later on, space is a premium. You want to make sure you use it wisely, and we talk about color because we're going to see some shocking things with color in a lot of figures. I went through the literature and found a number of publications or guides on different components of making good figures, and I've kind of flogged most of those. So the references are written on the slides. But basically, one key thing, especially with graphs, is removing the clutter. Unnecessary borders, unnecessary tick marks, and you can see in this right-hand example, there's just so many marker points that it's almost impossible to see the data. Removing things like bounding boxes, so having the really solid things to not needing an outline. Having the right background colors, so going from this kind of orange or sepia kind of to a white clean background. We don't need shadows for things, even though PowerPoint loves to add shadows to a lot of components. We don't need blocky arrows, you can use kind of basic arrows. So these are some things just to think about cleaning up and making the data more easy to interpret. Another important thing, and you'll see again when we get to some of the publications and their recommendations, but choosing the right font. So having like minimal text on your figure, and it should be nice and clean and easy to follow is really important. So most journals will say that you should have a sans serif font, not a serif font. Thanks for saying that there's these little accent bits. We don't need all the little ticks and things. And those fonts are things like Calibri, Arial, Helvetica. There's a few other ones that will come up, but they're the main ones. We see a lot of times unnecessary use of like different fonts. You might have your accent title in Arial, but then some other language with Helvetica. And we'll show you in Illustrator how you can do that. Try to use like one font, but use bold or size to help with certain things. It's a nice way of doing it. Where possible, reduce the text sizes. Often the AXI labels are really big and they don't need to be. So if you're just copying and pasting it in from Prism or Excel, it's usually stupidly large AXI files. And justify your text properly. So justify, like left align, center, right line, or justify the full width. For lots of multi-lines of text, just use left alignment. I know a lot of people will center things, but it makes it harder to read. When it comes to graphs, they help you to show trends. So if you're using in microscopy space, you might have something like a drug, you might have a time series, but you want to make sure that you're using the right graph. So bar graphs are good for comparing discrete, non-continuous data. If you're trying to show a trend over continuous data, then obviously line graphs are good. If there's distributions of things to say, well, I put this cover on my end and get bigger, then you might want to use like a box and whisker plot or violin plots common now, dot plots like that. And then there are these composite drafts that you might have something like spatial transformation. You need to represent different colors and groupings and things like that. Another really important thing is color, as I mentioned. So think about color blindness first. Traditionally, we always use red, green, blue. It's the favorite, that's what most people use it like that. But it's not very useful if you're colorblind, because often the red is not visible very well. So in this example, which I've modified from this paper at the bottom here, but it's a standard testing in Fiji, changing the lookup tables from red, green, and blue to cyan, magenta, and green greatly improves how you see that. I don't think anyone would argue that the top one looks better. Showing individual channels, whether you show it as like green lookup or gray, usually journals will ask you to have the single channels in grayscale. And then you might have the color merge. Sometimes as well, inverting the lookup table can improve how we view things. So our vision is logarithmic, so we can get biased really easily. So having these gradient lookup tables can also help show big differences. This is from the Nature figure guides, and Nature has lots of different applications. There's one kind of standard reference text for how you should do things. Lots of nice little figures and call outs on the blog. But suffice to say, they want high contrast for text and things like that. So don't put white or gray because it's horrible to read. I know that on green and you'll get an angle, but also with colors on color, they recommend this type of thing that has a contrast ratio of greater than 5. They don't actually say how to calculate that. Signal to noise, I guess. It also emphasizes the things that key point is you don't need color, don't use it. No, the printer is good if you print something with the whole black and white. You don't need color all the time. Well, it looks pretty, it's not always necessary.